that to the Union of the States, this nation owes its unprecedented increase in population, its surprising development of material resources, its rapid augmentation of wealth, its happiness at home, and its honor abroad. And we hold in abhorrence all schemes for disunion, come from whatever source they may. And we congratulate the country that no Republican member of Congress has uttered or countenanced the threats of disunion so often made by Democratic members, without rebuke and with applause from their political associates. And we denounce those threats of disunion in case of a popular overthrow of their ascendancy as denying the vital principles of a free government and as an avowal of contemplated treason, which it is the imperative duty of an indignant people sternly to rebuke and forever silence. Republican Party Platform, May 17th, 1860.
Welcome to Civics and Coffee. My name is Alicia, and I am a self-professed history nerd. Each week, I'm going to chat about a topic on U.S. history and give you both the highlights and occasionally break down some of the complexities in history and share stories you may not remember learning in high school, all in the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Next year marks an election year in the United States, and if you have even a passing interest in politics, then I'm sure you know how bizarre some American elections can be. Crazy elections feel like an American pastime, and as the country found itself on the brink of civil war, the presidential contest of 1860 proved no different. Multiple conventions, third-party candidates, and a break in campaign tradition all contributed to a dramatic election as Abraham Lincoln came out victorious. So this week, I am diving into the election of 1860. Grab your cup of coffee, peeps. Let's do this. Sectional tensions were at an all-time high as the nation prepared to head to the polls. Southern residents, still in a whirlwind over the violence of John Brown's raid, were increasingly fearful over the potential of the federal government's intervention on their sacred economic practice. For those living in the North, frustrations were at a fever pitch over the lack of national action against slavery. The crisis was reflected in the halls of Congress as regional identity overrode party loyalty, paving the way for the nascent Republican Party to make significant electoral gains in the 1854 elections. Their surprising series of victories led many to believe that the 1860 contest could end with an anti-slavery president. Depending on how one felt about the issue, the idea was either incredibly exciting or a terrifying turn of events that could pose a serious risk to the Southern economy. There was also the threat of losing congressional dominance. Southern representatives had long enjoyed control of both chambers of Congress, and several like-minded presidents, who overwhelmingly came from Southern states. If the Republicans gained a foothold, some worried, they may be locked out of power forever. The parties gathered for their conventions in the spring. The Democrats, increasingly fractured, originally chose Charleston, South Carolina as the host city, arriving to debate their pick for president on April 23rd. However, the regional tensions proved to be a significant issue, with Southern and Northern Democrats split on who they should choose. As the party required a two-thirds vote in order to secure a nomination, the inability to compromise on a candidate set the convention up for failure before it even started. The party went through a whopping 56 ballots before realizing they were at a standstill. In one last effort to ensure party unity, leaders delayed the convention for 6 weeks, setting up a redo in Baltimore in June. However, the delay did not solve the overall problem as the party was imploding in on itself. There was so much infighting that they could not even agree which delegates to recognize. Southern Democrats, singularly focused on protecting the institution of slavery, pushed for including support for a federal slave code, and when that failed, they stormed out. Still determined to select a candidate, the angered members of the party met separately at the Maryland Institute Hall, where they nominated John C. Breckinridge and included support for the federal slave code on their platform. The Northern Democrats, however, chose Stephen Douglas as their party leader and former Georgia Governor Herschel Johnson as the candidate for vice president. Douglas, known for his work on the Compromise of 1850 and his series of debates with Lincoln in 1858, was unpopular in the South, with newspapers calling him the demagogue of Illinois. And for those who thought my Lincoln episode may have been about the debates with Douglas, I recommend checking out an earlier episode of mine where I covered these and a number of other historic debates. It is uncreatively titled The History of Debates, and it was released back in October of 2020. Working to combat the narrative of Douglas as some power-hungry crusader, Douglas and his allies tried to portray his bid as the only one capable of keeping the country together. Included in their party platform was the support of a coast-to-coast railroad and acquiring the island nation of Cuba. Trying to maintain peace over what they considered a difference of opinion regarding slavery, Northern Democrats also wrote the party would, quote, abide by the decision of the Supreme Court of the United States upon these questions of Constitution law, end quote. As most of the sitting justices on the Supreme Court came from the South, this was a major carrot and effort at party unity. While the Democrats devolved into chaos, the Republicans tried to emulate strength through unity, arriving in Chicago on May 15, 1860. Heading into the convention, former New York Governor and Senator William Seward was seen as the frontrunner. However, just before the convention opened, the Chicago Press and Tribune placed their bets on the junior politician, writing a day before the convention, quote, the winning man, Abraham Lincoln, end quote. Whatever momentum or support Seward enjoyed, Lincoln still posed a tangible threat, and detractors did what they could to undercut his popularity. They rightfully criticized his inexperience, but also engaged in personal attacks, pointing to Lincoln's speech patterns as a sign of lacking intellect. In the South, Lincoln was vilified as a race traitor, a man who was hell-bent on ending slavery and forcing a mix of the races, despite the candidate's many speeches indicating his support for keeping the institution in the states where it already existed. And with the raid on Harper's Ferry fresh in the memories of many, the party tried diligently to paint itself not as an anti-slavery coalition ready to outlaw the institution, but as a group ready to take reasonable approaches in addressing the spread and practice of slavery. Aware of their portrayal as fanatics throughout the South, Republicans tried to build a clear message with their party platform. Their overall message, part of which I read at the top of the episode, was preserving the Union, proclaiming, quote, Union of the states must and shall be preserved, end quote. However, they were not afraid to stand their ground, including in their platform, quote, the new dogma that the Constitution of its own force carries slavery into any or all of the territories of the United States is dangerous political heresy, end quote. Sticking with tradition, Abraham Lincoln did not attend the convention. Instead, he paced back and forth to the telegraph office, anxiously seeking updates. As the first vote came to an end, Seward came out on top with 173.5 votes, with Lincoln just behind him with 102. With 70 of those votes coming from Seward's home state of New York, he was vulnerable, and Lincoln supporters moved quickly to try to build on his support. By the second ballot, Lincoln was just 3.5 votes behind Seward, and it was becoming clear that momentum was on Lincoln's side. By the third ballot, Lincoln clinched the nomination. Former teacher and newspaper publisher Hannibal Hamlin was chosen as his running mate. After securing the nomination, Lincoln continued to support the party's push for unity, reaching out to his former competitors, including Samuel Chase, where he foreshadowed how he planned to govern, writing partially, quote, holding myself the humblest of all whose names were before the convention, I feel in especial need of the assistance of all, end quote. Despite having 3 candidates and platforms to choose from, there remained a significant chunk of individuals who were just dissatisfied with their options. Adding to the chaos, these gentlemen formed the Constitutional Union Party and also hosted a convention beginning on May 9th in Baltimore. Mainly composed of former Whigs, they wished to preserve the Union, but overwhelmingly representing the South, felt the Republican Party was just too radical. Individuals representing 21 states arrived at the convention ready to choose someone they saw as a middle ground candidate. Their choice was Southern slaveholder John Bell from Tennessee. While a slaveholder and someone who supported the institution, Bell was not in support of its expansion and built a reputation as a moderate politician. Unlike today, candidates for president did not hit the campaign trail. This trend continued in 1860 with the exception of Stephen Douglas. Lincoln remained in Springfield, Illinois. John Bell made no speeches, and John C. Breckinridge spoke only once. But Douglas broke with long-standing tradition and made the rounds, trying to garner enthusiasm for the ticket and trying to convince others that his was the only administration that could preserve the country. Attacks against Lincoln, seen as Douglas's chief competition, remained apace, with detractors calling him a deist and portraying him as a radical abolitionist. Through it all, he remained tight-lipped, refusing to give speeches or speak publicly, instead pointing people to his previous public statements. Lincoln broke his silence only once, addressing concerns that Southerners viewed his candidacy as a direct threat to their way of life, writing in August, quote, "The people of the South have too much good sense and good temper to attempt the ruin of the government," end quote. Relegated to Springfield, Lincoln's sense of where a large section of the country stood was misguided at best. As historian and Lincoln biographer Ronald C. White Jr. asserts, quote, "Thinking of himself as a son of the South, he failed to appreciate that Kentucky, as a border state, was not representative of Southern opinion," end quote. When all was settled and the votes were cast, Abraham Lincoln was declared the victor, becoming the 16th President of the United States. This victory came despite the fact that Lincoln won just 40% of the popular vote. A significant chunk of the country did not vote for the president-elect. As the Southern candidate, John Breckinridge carried 11 out of the 15 Southern states, coming in third in the popular vote. However, with 180 electoral votes, it was Lincoln, and not Breckinridge, Douglas, or Bell, who now had to prepare to govern a divided country. Almost immediately, Southern states began plotting their exit, planning secession conventions. South Carolina led the charge and on December 20th, 1860, left the United States, issuing their Declaration of Secession. Formally titled the Declaration of the Immediate Causes which Induce and Justify the Secession of South Carolina from the Federal Union, South Carolina wrote their decision to leave the Union, quote, "An increasing hostility on the part of the non-slaving states to the institution of slavery has led to a disregard of their obligations, and the laws of the general government have ceased to affect the objects of the Constitution," end quote. Invoking both the Declaration of Independence and the federal Constitution, South Carolina declared that the, quote, "sectional combination for the submersion of the Constitution," end quote, was destructive to the South and their way of life and, therefore, necessitated their exit from the United States. South Carolina was quickly joined in leaving the country as Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all followed suit in 1861. Preparing for his journey to Washington, Lincoln was starting to see just how dangerous some believed him to be. Understanding the gravity of the moment, the president-elect spoke to a crowd gathered in Springfield in February, saying, quote, "I now leave, not knowing when or whether ever I may return, with a task before me greater than that which rested upon Washington," end quote. In many respects, he was right. While Washington had the daunting task of carving out the duties and expectations of chief executive of a newly formed nation, he did so with the support of many throughout the country. Even those who hesitated over the idea of a massive centralized government felt more at ease knowing that it was Washington who was at the helm. Lincoln had no such support. His election came at a pivotal moment, and he faced a significant challenge. Again, from historian Ronald White, Lincoln had to determine how to, quote, "defend the Union, but not resort to war," and how to save the Union, but not give in to compromise." End quote. Facing threats of assassination, Abraham Lincoln boarded the train and headed east. Inaugurated on March 4th, Lincoln would be in office just over a month before the first shots of the Civil War would ring out at Fort Sumter. The country would never be the same. And with that, dear friends, we've officially kicked off our Civil War coverage. I still plan on mixing it up a bit for you with guests and covering some of your requested topics, but I am also really excited to dive into this period of history with you all. Before I sign off, I want to say thank you to Bill, who recently supported the podcast through Buy Me a Coffee. In his donation, Bill said he enjoyed the new details he learned and could further research on his own, which made me oh so happy, as that was exactly what I had in mind when I developed the show. Thank you so much, Bill. And I also want to give a heartfelt thanks to all of you out there. You've stuck with the show for a long time, and your support means the world to me. I am in the final stretch of my graduate program, and I would not be here without your encouragement. Enjoy your holiday season, peeps. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Civics and Coffee. If you want to hear more small snippets from American history, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to our next cup of coffee together.